Hello, hello. Welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and on Sundays I do a thing called Books and Booze, where I review a book and mix up a cocktail. This month, I've been looking at some of the nefarious crap that our government has gotten up to over the years, making this week's book Operation Paperclip, the Secret Intelligence Program that Brought Nazi Scientists to America by Annie Jacobsen. This one has been recommended to me for a while by a friend of mine on Instagram, and so I'm finally getting around to it. It fit with the theme. The accompanying cocktail is a res ipsa liquitur. It's a riff on an old-fashioned, and it's inspired by the legal phrase res ipsa loquitur, which means the thing speaks for itself, and refers to a legal doctrine that assumes negligence when the defendant had exclusive control over the cause of the injury or damage. It fits. Anyways, the cocktail itself is 2 ounces of Suntory Toki whiskey, a ½ ounce of plum and apple ginger syrup, and 2 dashes of Angustora Bitters. So let's do this. The plum and apple syrup had to make myself. The person who created the recipe included directions on that, so it should be pretty straightforward. In the closing days of World War II, as the Allied forces of Russia in the east, and then you had France, England, and America in the west, started closing in on the Third Reich, the various powers started scrambling to claim what they could of the Reich scientists for themselves. So they start scrambling and going, well, we want this, and we want this, and we want this, and rather than just hanging a lot of them for being Nazis, they started divvying them up. Basically, whoever could find a scientist would take that scientist home with them, basically. The information that was unearthed as the various forces moved through Germany was truly alarming, and not just because of the horrific treatment of the concentration camp inmates. I mean, that quickly became apparent. I mean, you can... Eisenhower famously wanted like video and photographic evidence of this, because he's like, if we don't photograph this, people are going to think we made it up. It's that bad. And it is that bad. Yes, they knew that how bad it was at the concentration camps. Hang on. This is not a day for me to multitask. I'm just not there today. Clearly, I am back from Colorado, and my brain is still slightly scrambled. Okay, so the horrific treatment of the concentration camp inmates. That utterly inhuman and inhumane treatment led to some truly impressive leaps in medicine, engineering, science. I mean, it's easy to advance these things when you don't have any ethics, and when you have a clear dictate from your entire chain of command up to and including the head honcho, aka Adolf Hitler, that the people being experimented on aren't even people at all. It is one of the true dangers of a lot of the rhetoric being sold these days, is that we're being told people aren't people, they're monsters. They're Nazis because they don't agree with us, even if they're not Nazis. They're less than human, and so it's okay to treat them as subhuman. This is something that the Nazis taught, and that is being pushed as rhetoric nationwide right now. If they don't agree with me, they must be subhuman. It's just food for thought. Maybe we should all take a breath, step back, and go, oh yes, we are in fact all human, and maybe everybody is entitled to a little dignity. And kind of like your parents, if you ever had siblings and you fight with your siblings and your parents said, I don't give a shit who started it, I'm ending it. Doesn't matter what the other side does. Maybe be the one to end it. All right, I'm going to carefully pour my syrup here and then step off my soapbox. Subhuman. Now, in the years immediately after the war, and I mean from the time Hitler put a bullet in his own brain, the rush was on. All right, that was kind of a shit splash. There we go. And ultimately, America would offer more than 1,600 former Nazis contracts to continue work they had been doing for the Nazis, but for America. This one stirred. Let me stir this up. We offered 1,600 contracts. Jacobsen whittles down that list to 21 very specific men. Men who were so high up in the Nazi regime that every single one of them has, I think, been tried for their activities during the war. A not insignificant number of them probably should have been executed for their activities during the war. They were just very good at hiding the evidence. So as Jacobsen spells out, quote, the men profiled in this book were not nominal Nazis, The men profiled in this book were not nominal Nazis. Nominal means in name only. 8 of the 21 at some point worked side by side with Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, or Hermann Goering during the war. 15 of the 21 were dedicated members of the Nazi Party. 10 of them also joined the ultra-violent, ultra-nationalistic Nazi paramilitary squad, so the SS, the Sturmschützen Sturmabteilung, so the secret police, the police who are going around and actually beating people, beating their heads in, right? 2 wore Golden Party badge indicating favor bestowed by the Fuhrer himself. 1 was given an award for 1 million Reichsmarks for scientific achievement. Ponder that for a moment. That is quite tasty. Well, the Suntory Toki whiskey tends to be very smooth anyways, and the syrup is just perfection. Perfect. So no matter how much each of these 21 men denied their party affiliations, and every single one of them did, they were not nominal Nazis. This was not name only. They were the hardcore, central to the party tenet members. Some of them were party members since the party started. And they had, in turn, earned loyalty from Hitler, Himmler, or Goering. Every single one of them would deny that they were Central Party members, that they were that high up. They're like, no, I was basically forced into it. And that became basically the line they would toe up until their dying breaths, every single one of them. No, I wasn't really a Nazi. I was barely a party member. I was forced into it. I had to do it to be, to keep doing my work. And my favorite of all, I was just following orders. None of which is true, which is completely irrelevant because they were still given contracts to come to America. Now, it is quite easy to assume the U.S. government just kind of opened the doors and welcomed them in with open arms. Like, hey, come on over and work for us. We'll give you a contract. We know you were just the science geeks. You didn't actually mean anything. And there are certainly those who, as Jacobsen put it, saw only the scientist, not the ideologue behind the scientist. But there were many more who pushed back against this monstrous push, like push back against it hard. They fought back when they could to ensure that those who made the move to America were later removed from her shining shores when they discovered just who was living amongst our ranks, courtesy of the Joint Chiefs. Not even necessarily the president. Isn't that lovely? Now, among the heroes, and that's not an ironic, I don't mean like a sarcastic heroes. I'm not talking in this case about the Nazis as heroes. I'm talking about the literal heroes who fought back against this bizarre chapter in American history. A shining example is Dr. Leopold Alexander. Now, he was one of the post-war investigators. His name probably has come very recently back to life as one of the co-authors of the Nuremberg Codes, meaning post-trial. He said, this is what we need. That this is what needs to happen for it to be ethical medical treatment, ethical medical experimentation. A lot more people learned his name in the last 5 years. Something happened 5 years ago that brought his name back to the present. Now, he was one of the post-war investigators who consulted during the Nuremberg trials and co-authored those Nuremberg Codes. Now, in 1951, Dr. Alexander is working in Boston. He's back from his time in Germany. He's been discharged from the military, and he's working as a medical assistant. And he gets a call by our medical doctor. He gets a call by the International Rescue Office that is working to provide medical assistance for camp survivors. One of whom, Janina Ivanska, is known to Alexander. She had been one of the witnesses during the doctor's trials at Nuremberg. Now, as Alexander is preparing for her arrival, he spots a small note in a medical journal that Walter Schreiber has just joined the staff of the U.S. Air Force School at Aviation Medicine in Texas. And that's a name that Alexander knows well, and so does Ivanska, because she was experimented on by Dr. Gebhardt at the direction of Dr. Schreiber. So Schreiber was well known. Now, Alexander, being the good, solid, upstanding American citizen that he is, he reached out to the Massachusetts Medical Society, who I think they were the publishers of the article, and advised them that the U.S. Air Force had now hired a literal Nazi. And not just a run-of-the-mill, low-down in the rankings guy, but not a nominal one, a major player, right? Somebody who was in the inner circle of the Hitler and Goering and, Himmler. And he probably should have been executed, but managed to escape death, primarily because he was actually picked up by the Russians first. Russia had put Schreiber forward as a witness against Drs. Kramer and Dr. Holzlerner. Schreiber eventually escaped the Russians, and I put escaped in quotes, because there is plenty of evidence that he was actually slipping intelligence to the Russians. The CIA, yes, Operation Paperclip quickly slipped from being purely military, and the newly formed CIA got in on the action quite early. They swore up and down that Schreiber was working for them and was under control. But Jacobsen speculates he may in fact have been a double agent, told us he was working, that he was going to slip false information to the Russians while really sneaking information to the Russians. Well, we're never going to actually know, right? Anyways, the military and the MMS, the Massachusetts Medical Society, they came back. So they've been told about this by Dr. Alexander and basically said, there's nothing to see here. Schreiber's one of the good Nazis, right? If there could be said to be such a thing. And Schreiber would be allowed to practice medicine in the United States because he was not, in fact, one of the bad guys. He's one of ours now. He's one of us. He's got an Operation Paperclip contract. And Alexander knew that to be absolute bullshit, so he quietly tipped off the Boston Globe. It's a good man. This was 51. This is back in the day when journalists actually took pride in their work and followed a news story into the ground and didn't invent news stories to, sell a narrative. So, good on them. Schreiber eventually fled to Argentina because his contract was on the point of being canceled and he was about to actually go to trial for his own crimes. So he ran away to Argentina like all the good little Nazis did back in the day. So who is Schreiber? How bad was he? Why do we care? Why would we not want him in America? So Schutzstaffel Brigade Führer Walter Schreiber was the chief of the Armament Supply Office in the Speer Ministry. Albert Speer. Albert Speer was very high up. He actually did serve time. He served like 20 years for his crimes in Germany and then became a best-selling author. Because I need to know more, I went ahead and put his books on my wish list because I'm insane. The good news is I'm buying them used. The even better news is he is long dead, so it's not like he's going to actually benefit from my purchase. He was the liaison, not Speer, excuse me. Schreiber was the liaison to the industrial production of Tabin and sarin gas. He was on Himmler's personal staff. Inner sanctum. Himmler, like that's second, third guy in charge. Tabin is a chemical reagent that causes central nervous system malfunction and is universally fatal at very low doses. And it's like 1 part per kilogram or something. It's just a tiny dose is fatal. Sarin is similarly toxic. Schreiber was the man to make sure that both were produced on industrial scales, ostensibly for use on the battlefield, which that was what was so alarming to America is when they took over, when they found these stockpiles, right? America was so far behind on the matter of chemical and biological weaponry that they desperately wanted the people who could help us to catch up quick, even if those people were Nazis. They felt the same way about explosive ordnance, which is why they brought over Werner von Braun, Herbert Axter, Kurt DeBus, Walter Dornberger, Georg Ricci, Walter Riedel, Arthur Rudolph. Now you might think, okay, and these are engineers, right? Not chemists, not doctors, and we also have engineers who are designing bombs and rockets. How is what they were doing any different, right? They're doing the exact same thing our guys are doing. Well, sort of. I mean, yes, these guys are Nazis. Everybody needs to feed their families, and judging by our own engineering pools, they're basically just math geeks, right? I mean, the tail end of the STEM acronym. So why the fuck do we care that we hired these Nazis? Well, she covers that too. It's not just that they were the inner sanctum, that they were all associated with Himmler, Goering, and Hitler. The engineers used slave labor, provided courtesy of the concentration camp system to manufacture the things that they mathed up in their engineering labs. Slave labor has been outlawed in the United States since 1865. So we're ahead of them on that human right. Jacobsen recounts one horrific incident where the engineers decided the inmates were not working hard enough and hung 13 of them from a crane in a factory, leaving the bodies up until they started to decompose. Because they're just engineers, right? Now, even while Paperclip was ongoing, this was not a secret. All right, this leaked out very quickly and to universally negative reviews. Like the press kept coming at the government like, what are you doing? We literally just fought a war against these guys. Why are you offering them sanctuary here in the United States? And so the military, for their part, didn't deny it. But they just said, well, we're hiring the good Nazis, the ones who were forced into it, not the ones who, actually had any level of power or anything. The people walking those halls of power, the unelected officials who run our country, the deep state as outlined by Edward Snowden, they were making such great strides forward in research in weaponry, spaceflight, medicine, biological and chemical warfare, that they just made it an open secret. Yes, of course we're hiring Nazis. but they're good Nazis. There are Nazis, not the bad ones. The bad ones are the ones we have to worry about that went over and worked for the Russians. Only the nominal Nazis, that's what they claimed. Only the ones who are forced to join the party to feed their families. I can't help but feel like this whole thing from Operation Paperclip, because like I said, it was an open secret, all right? It was a terribly kept secret. Everybody knew it was happening. But they just kept swearing up and down, no, they're not real Nazis, they're nominal Nazis. It was only people who were forced to join the party, right? I feel like this is what has led to the myth that most Germans were not in fact Nazis. Most of them were actually just good people who didn't have a choice in the matter. Real hard to say how much of that is true when we hired a significant chunk of them and then buried their past for our own benefit. Now, from these Nazi scientists, we literally got NASA. No joke. We also got Agent Orange. Got an enormous stockpile of ICBMs, chemical and biological warfare elements, which Richard Nixon ultimately dismantled during his presidency. I think we have an island somewhere in one of the oceans that is where we're currently storing things, and we're trying to figure out how to contain them so that we don't just kill all life on planet Earth with these monstrosities. We learned tremendous amounts about what the human body can withstand. We did not learn this in any sort of ethical manner. We got this information from the Nazis, who got it from direct human experimentation on the Untermenschen, aka the inmates at the concentration camps. And then we just co-opted all that knowledge. Now, to give some tiny bit of credit it's due, and this is tiny, 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 she recounts a couple of the Nazis who seemed to actually express remorse and regret. At least one of them, who had been involved in the frozen water baths that he used to force the inmates into to see how long they could withstand the cold, would himself later experiment on himself with ice baths to see just how bad it was. I would hope that indicates some level of remorse, that not all monsters stay monsters. Some people do snap out of the ideology and go, oh my God, what have I done? But I could also just be trying to humanize a very inhuman thing. From all of this testing, we got thalidomide. Yeah, that shocked me. That shocked me that popped up in here too. I was like, really, thalidomide? Tell me more. Now, you may, if you're a history buff, you've probably heard of thalidomide. If you've not, then in the 1950s and 60s, there was this new miracle drug that was being used to treat morning sickness in pregnant women that ultimately resulted in over 10,000 babies being born with severe birth defects, like missing limbs, missing ears, flippers for arms and legs, just very severe birth defects. Now, when thalidomide was approved for use in, I think it was England initially, but it may have just been Europe in general, the medical community there had been told that the human studies had already been completed, but the research backing it had been lost in the war. Now, think about that in context of this book. So now, I'm going to tell you that one of the doctors included in Operation Paperclip was Otto Ambros. He was an IG Farben chemist who was one of the discoverers of sarin gas. Sarin is actually a combined acronym of all of the doctors' names. The A in sarin was for Ambros. He discovered Buna synthetic rubber, which he's the recipient of that $1 million Reichsmark that I mentioned at the beginning of the review. He was the advisor to Kemi Grunenthal, which is the marketer of thalidomide, and he was on the board of directors for that same company, and was the manager of IG Farben's slave labor factory at Auschwitz, and the manager of Die Herrenfurth poison gas facility. Well, as they said, the documents regarding human trials of thalidomide had been lost or destroyed during the war. I'll give you one guess as to who lost or destroyed those documents, and then put thalidomide on the market anyways. And this is who we invited into America post-World War II. And keeping with the other books this month, drugs were of course mentioned, kind of had to be. I mean, while the chemist who first identified LSD was not German, he was certainly not a Nazi. Albert Hofmann was Swiss. The company he worked for sold LSD to the Russians, which caused panic and caused the CIA to start experimenting. So MK Ultra got its start with Operation Paperclip scientists. So it's entirely possible that the Nazis are ultimately responsible for Charles Manson. Makes a nice conspiracy theory, right? All the evils of the world in one neat little basket. History is not that neat. It's a lot messier. Now, as the truth has slowly leaked out, the honors these men were awarded, and we're talking they had research libraries named after them. Major scientific awards were named for them and then given out annually. Plaques on buildings, awards in their names. This has all been slowly reversed. Not universally, it's just as the truth leaks out, we're like, why the fuck do we have a building named after that man? Why are we offering scientific awards in that man's name? Some who actually knew the men and became great friends with them, you know, they saw the scientist, not the ideologue, didn't necessarily agree with pulling the awards that they were granted or recognized in their name. It's interesting because you like historically, knowing what I know from the books I've read and the history I've learned, knowing just how evil the Nazi ideology was and the damage and loss of humanity that came as a result of this horrifying decade, you know, what, almost 2 decades. You can't help but wonder if people had just talked to each other, could we have avoided it altogether? No, if Woodrow Wilson had kept us out of World War I, we could have avoided it altogether, but he's a fucking asshole, and he's somewhere in the deepest layers of hell. And I saw a meme today, actually, that, well, I laughed. Jacobsen's is not the first book to be written on Paperclip, but she will probably not be the last. An earlier book was written in the 1980s by CNN reporter Linda Hunt, again, back when reporters actually did their jobs and CNN was actually news. And so she quoted from that quite extensively. She also did interviews with like the grandchildren of some of these Nazis who graciously opened up family archives to her, went through all the hoops for the Freedom of Information Act discoveries, and was surprised by how frequently she was told, we have no files. Well, all of these files have officially been declassified, except as she points out, you can't declassify documents you can't find. And the implication of that being that they were lost on purpose to continue protecting government interests. She doesn't say that. It's just the conspiracy theorist in me is rising to the top here because I've read a lot of bizarre shit over the last few years. This book was fascinating. It was a very fast read with quick snapshots of the atrocities that happened without letting those atrocities become the overwhelming focus of the book. Because as awful as the Holocaust was, this book is not directly about that. It's about America's complicity in shielding the incredibly guilty mass murderers who implemented the Holocaust. All right, I mean, the idea started with Hitler, but it actually needed people to implement it, and these are the people who implemented the Holocaust. And we shielded them. We welcomed them over. We gave them money and honors and a life here for our own benefit. And I wish I could say I was scandalized by this, but I'm really not. This isn't even really a blip on my radar for the shit that America's gotten up to. And that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next Sunday. Bye.